My name is Verna Logan, and I did print a little bit of an agenda that hopefully all of you have picked up on the side over there. Welcome to our granting information session. So what I'm going to do first off is just give you a brief history of the Phoenix Foundation for those of you who are not familiar with it. I know there's some people that are just learning about the foundation. It was formally created in 1997 as a full community foundation and a member of the Community Foundations of Canada. Last fall, we celebrated our 20th anniversary here in the Boundary. Through the early development, the school district, number 51, and the Grand Forks Credit Union and the City of Grand Forks were supporting organizations that provided critical administration and resources. Today, the Grand Forks Credit Union continues to be a huge supporter and contributor to the foundation, and we acknowledge their support. Through the contributions from donors, the foundation assembles and administers permanent endowment funds so that income can be eternally reinvested in our community. Through our granting process, the revenue from these endowments supports local charitable organizations, community projects, and initiatives for today and into the future. For donors, the foundation offers the ability to make positive change here in the Boundary by contributing with others that share similar interests in this community. To the community at large, the foundation offers a permanent, growing source of funds for community projects, leadership grants, and scholarships. The foundation helps the people of the Boundary area by encouraging philanthropy and funding charitable activities. A question that often comes up at the foundation is, how do we decide how much to grant each year? For the answer, I was going to let our treasurer, Becky Clements, share with you how the finances work. Becky was in Cranbrook today and hoped to make it back in time for the meeting, but guess what? The roads didn't allow that. Fortunately, I have her notes, so I didn't make this up. She knows what she's doing. The foundation has grown over the last 20 years to become a sizable community asset. Donations received to the foundation are invested with growth and safety in mind. And as a result, it has become an investment of about $2.5 million. Community donors, personal and corporate, have generously contributed to various endowments with the Phoenix Foundation to ensure a legacy is in place to provide permanent funding for the Boundary community's charitable initiatives. As a charitable organization, the Phoenix Foundation must preserve the capital of the donated funds, using only the income it generates from the investing activities it conducts. We work with a professional management company, Dixon Mitchell, who provides us with the necessary expertise in managing the funds. We also have funds invested with the Vancouver Foundation. We must abide by Canada Revenue Agency rules to ensure that we maintain our charitable status and ensure we distribute the annual minimum amount required under taxes. So we have a quota every year that we have to grant out. The investments have grown steadily, averaging 4.6% growth to the end of October 2017. Since the fund inception, while exercising conservative and balanced investment choices, add to this, each year the foundation receives additional donations that typically amount to between $200,000 and $300,000. Within the foundation, there are several categories of endowments. Many endowments have specific standing recipients who will receive annual proceeds. For example, the scholarships. Those are self-explanatory. We have several scholarships that are granted out through the school, and they go usually through the high school and go to our local graduating students. Other endowments have been set up with designated recipients or agencies such as Boundary Family and Individual Services Society, the Friends of the Library Society, or Grand Forks Art Gallery Society. The the work of the granting committee is to determine how to allocate the endowment grant proceeds that do not have standing beneficiary named recipients. These funds are what we call unrestricted community funds, or areas of interest, and in some cases, donor-advised funds. For this coming granting year, 2018, there is a sum of $25,600 approximately available for granting from either the unrestricted community or areas of interest endowments. There's a further $24,000 from the Grand Forks Credit Union donor-advised endowment. All tallied up, we have about $50,000 in grant funds that will be dispersed among many recipients. When we include the designated funds, agency funds, and scholarships, the Phoenix Foundation will have around $86,000 to distribute into the community in 2018. And this is all due from the generous donations of our donors. So that's exactly how it happens. It's not the only decisions that the foundation actually makes are with the general community fund. All the other funds are already predetermined, and the scholarships. And the Grand Forks Credit Union, with their donor advised fund, they take a look at the grant recipients the letters of interest that we receive, and they tell us which ones they're interested in funding. And sometimes if there's a special project, they will come to us and say that that's what they're interested in funding. So now you know where the money's coming from and how it's determined how much goes into each category. The next question is, how does the foundation decide which grants are given out? Please welcome Carolyn Teason, our Grants Committee Chair, to go over this with you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I realize what the roads are like. It's nasty out there, and yeah, we're looking at that. Can I ask if anyone is if it's anyone's first time at a meeting?
First time what?
First time at a foundation meeting, at a grants meeting. Wow. Well, welcome. I'm glad you came. It's always nice to see new faces. So I'm going to talk about what we grant for. We grant for. We use our vital signs, and that is a booklet that we've created, that we've asked the questions where the need is the most. And what needs do we have in this community and in the surrounding area? So we took all that information, and when we're making decisions as a grants committee, we really consider them. We take a long time looking at them. The letters of interest come in, and we debate them. We really do. We sit there, we mull it over. We must talk for 4 hours on subjects, deciding, redeciding, and reallocating, and doing what we can to make it happen, to make it spread out as far as we can, and make it as valuable as we can for this community and for the surrounding community. After all, the boundary is a large area. You know, it's from Beaverdale, Bridesville, all the way to Christina Lake. And there's lots of need all the way through that area. So anyway, what do we grant for? What do we look for? We look for program-related projects. We look for measurable goals. And we look for capital projects. Capital projects are things as construction, such as, let's say, a storage building that needs to be built, especially for an organization that has special needs people in there, and they need a dry place to put their equipment. And so we would fund for that. Renovations. If there's a bathroom, let's say, that needs refitting for wheelchair accessibility, we fund for that. Equipment, movable equipment. Let's say the food bank. They need shelves that move back and forth, or we fund for that. There are many things that we fund for. What we look for the most is where we can have the largest impact and where the needs are. And of course, where the qualifications are. So you do have to qualify. And that means that if you are not a charitable organization, that means that we need to look a little further sometimes to see if there's a host that would umbrella you. You know, someplace that that might say, okay, well, you meet with our convictions and our criteria and what we stand for, and yeah, I'll sponsor you this time. So we look for that as well. We also do for seed grants. Now, looking for something new is what that is. We look for new innovative ways and means by which to organizations that are up and coming. Somebody that's got a new idea how they can help and how they can make it a better place, right? So that's one of the hugest things that we look for. We haven't had a lot of opportunities there because the rules and regulations are strict. And if we don't abide by them, we lose our status. If we lose our status, it's awful, you know. It's not good for the community. So anyway, what can I tell you about? I can tell you that we had a wonderful lady on the committee that was going to speak tonight, and I'm afraid she's had an emergency situation, so she's not going to be here. However, she left me her notes too. So let's go through some of this. What is the Grants Committee's role? What is it that we look for? Grants Committees make recommendations to the board as to where the earnings from the capital discretionary endowment funds go. Recommends is the operative word. The final decision is always the board's decision. But the recommendations go a long way. Anyway, Grants Committee must only accept applications from qualified donees. Qualified donees are nonprofits that have charitable status under the Canada Revenue Agency and hold a valid CRA charitable number. Any nonprofit that wishes to apply for funding and does not have a valid CRA number can approach a qualified donee to sponsor their grant application. If funded, the board, the Phoenix Foundation, will forward the funds to the qualified donee as required by law, with the expectation that the funds will be forwarded to the grant applicant. I have an example of that. I'm not going to use names, I'm just going to use generalizations, but there was a church in one of the outlying communities, and there was a food bank that wasn't a registered charity. But they were doing what they could to provide food for that community. And so what they approached the church, and because they were using the church basement to help to distribute this food from, the church umbrellaed them. They became their sponsors, so to speak. And so when we put the check forward, we had to put the check forward to the church itself, because they're the ones that had the charitable status. And then the church gave it to the food bank that was there. So that's how that worked. I'm sorry, was there a question?
Are you okay taking questions partway through?
Yeah, by all means.
Did the food bank have to be a part of the church then, essentially? Did they have to operate out of that church? Or the umbrella in sort of a metaphorical aspect where they have their own business separate?
You know, I think that because of the rural area that it was in, it could have been metaphorically. I don't see any. I don't see an issue with that.
Yeah, they don't have to be. Yeah.
Physically within the same
No.
space?
No,
to be
no,
honest.
no. And it had no real affiliation with the church itself.
Okay.
You know, it was just that the church had that charitable status, and they were able to help out that food bank. That didn't happen. Any other questions?
So I'll just throw in like
Yes.
some of the agencies that have provided help in the past are the city, the regional district. Although I think the regional district is no longer doing it, but depending upon the project.
Yeah, and I could also, like the TGIF, the Grand Forks, or the Greenwood Improvement Society, also acts as that charitable umbrella to grant out to NPOs in Greenwood that don't have the charitable status. So yeah, there is no necessary affiliation that has to be there. It can just be a host. So.
However, there has to be a relevance, right? Like, there has to be something that you can connect to.
Yeah.
So,
Like, for example, the daycare is looking after some children. The parents of those children are members of, I don't know, the chamber who needs the daycare to operate their business. Is that a close enough connection? Just throwing a random
when it comes to
example.
a daycare, usually it's,
This daycare does have charitable status.
oh, it does. Okay.
It's bizarre, but it does, yeah.
Okay. You know what? Realistically, what it boils down to is when you send in those letters of interest, you want to include all those factors, right? And that's what helps the committee to make these recommendations go forward. Okay, grants are made in different sectors. Arts and culture, child and family, seniors, special needs, health, welfare, education, youth, environment, animal welfare, social justice, libraries, and educational areas. The committee will consider supporting projects that are of benefit to the boundary area residents. Qualifying projects include programs-related projects designed to meet certain goals. As in the environmental weed reduction activities for the Grand Forks ATV Club and Trail Project. The capital projects, construction, renovation, and equipment purchases. Seed grants to help jumpstart a new organization, a new project, or launch a capital campaign. Seed grant funding needs to meet all of the Phoenix Foundation's requirements, though. All right, the committee looks to support projects where there is a demonstrated need, the likelihood of effectiveness, and the strong potential to serve as a model to others. Projects should build on strengths and assets of the community to respond and identify to issues and priorities. These priorities are outlined in the Foundation's periodic Vital Signs report. The last one was done in 2014, so we're only looking 3.5 years ago. But the need certainly hasn't lessened, so we move forward from there. Your organization should demonstrate a commitment to the project through the contribution of human, financial, and other kinds of resources. In other words, where there is other funding, where is the other funding coming from to complete that particular project? So what we're looking for, the organization should have at least 50% of their funding in place when they apply. Having said that, it is not always the case, and the committee has, in the past, recommended the funding of a smaller project at 100%. And has also recommended funding of projects for residual funds. That has not been identified. As a rule of thumb, agencies should seek to fund 30% of their project from the Phoenix Foundation. So that should be the original ask. Should be 30% of your entire project. Now, keep in mind that, hours, volunteer hours count. So, there's lots of variables there. So put all of them into place. Your human hours, your equipment time, your specialist that comes in, let's say an electrician or something like that. And you're just going to put in all the different factors that it's going to take to make that project work. And then make your ask for 30% of that. Okay? And that's in your letter of interest. That being said, it depends on how much interest there is, how many letters of interest we get, and how much there is to fund it. And that's what it boils down to. Not everyone will get funded the amount that they ask, the larger ask. There's been years when, it might have been half or even less. Last year, we were able to do almost the full of everything, so which was wonderful. You know, so it's a matter of how many people ask and what you're asking for. Okay. Here's what the committee will not recommend for. These are the do nots. We will not recommend for operational or core expenses. We will not recommend for retroactive funding or any project expenses that have incurred prior to the foundation's decision. Debt, retirement reserves, mortgage paydowns, conferences, competitions, festivals, fundraising activities, activities of religious organizations that serve primarily their membership or their direct religious purposes, amateur sports, schools construction, publication of books, or computer labs. So those are the do not asks for. There are lists on the website of CFC and some of the others where you can find out which charities in our community have a valid CRA number. And I only found this one page today. I'm afraid I didn't have all of them ready for you, and I am hoping that there's lots of people with CRA numbers ready to jump on board.
Can I just
Absolutely.
What's the would the CRA organization be just strictly flow through for funding, or they would forward funds, and then whatever other connections you've made an agreement with them? But in terms of when you're asking someone, do they have to write a report? Do they have to be coming to meetings? Do they have any of those responsibilities?
No. They just have to be supportive of your organization and what you're trying to do. Again, you need that connection, though. There has to be relevance.
And they do take full financial responsibility.
Is there a cut for them? Like, is there a 15%?
No, this is all charitable, so there's no. Gee, I think that'd be called money laundering.
No, that's all admin fees. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
It's standard. So.
And that may depend upon the organization you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't encountered any that are asking for admin fees that we know of. But
Yeah, we haven't. But lots of hours in lieu, right? And so there's things like that we can look at. Any questions?
Could you state the do not asks again, please?
The do not asks.
Yes, help.
Okay. Operational or core expenses. Retroactive funding or any project expenses that incurred prior to the foundation's decision date. Debt, retirement, or reserves. Mortgage paydowns. Conference, competitions, festivals, annual events, travel to or attendance as such to such events. Fundraising activities. Activities of religious organizations that serve primarily their membership or their direct religious purposes. They will not support student exchanges. Will not support amateur sports, school construction, publication of books, or computer labs. I'm going to turn this back over to Maria.
don't take my notes.
I did. Did you see that? I did.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Okay, now what I'm going to do is go through the actual process with you, how this all sort of fleshes out when you're an organization applying. So the stage one is the letter of interest or intent, and if you believe that your project falls within the guiding principles and decision-making criteria, you submit a letter not to, and I have a handout here for you so you don't have to take notes about this. Not to exceed 2 pages, outlining your proposal. In the letter, you include the registered name of your organization and the Canada Revenue Agency charitable number or sponsor's number, a statement of the issues or community priorities that your project will address, a concise description of the activity to be undertaken, and a brief budget, including information on the other funding sources and amount that you're requesting from the foundation. Complete contact information, including your email, phone, and mailing address. And it is beneficial to add your most recent financial statements with this letter of interest. The deadline, the foundation must receive your letter either electronically to Phoenix Foundation BDRY@gmail.com or by mail to the Grants Committee by midnight on February 28th. That's always been our deadline, so I'm not going to say which year. If your letter is received by email, we acknowledge your application and reply by email. So if you have sent an email and you didn't hear anything back, please contact us again to make sure that we've actually received it. Then your letters go to the Grants Committee, which Carolyn outlined. And there are 7 people on that committee from different areas of the boundary and different skill sets, I guess we'll call them, and experience in the boundary, so that we have a rounded committee to take a look at that preliminary process. You will usually hear in 2 to 4 weeks. The representatives of the grant committee might contact your organization to gain a further understanding of the project, and they may even want to do a site visit. So that process, like I said, 2 to 4 weeks before you will hear back from the foundation. After the Grants Committee does their initial process, they make their recommendations to the board of directors of the Phoenix Foundation, and once it's approved by the board, then the organizations are contacted and invited to submit a formal application. So that's stage 2. Those who are invited to receive a formal application, and by the way, those that don't make it through that process also get notified, and we generally tell them why we're not looking at funding them. So the package that goes forward for the formal applications will include the amount that you're invited to formally apply for. As Carolyn said, they try to be fair across the community, but keeping in mind that our top 3 priorities are always in the vital signs. So they're looking at that first, and some of our more recent community conversations, which Gary has been conducting, help us to keep a little more up to date on that, as housing was not an issue when that survey was done, and now housing is an issue in the boundary. So that information is also used in the process. So any conditions, you'll receive what you're allowed or invited to apply for, and any conditions and or changes that need to be met before you put your formal application in. So sometimes people have not found a host agency yet that they can work with, and they're still seeking them. So they'll put in a letter of intent saying we are seeking a host agency. And so if you are invited to put in a formal application, of course, that's one of the requirements, that you have that letter from the host agency stating that they will support you. The terms and conditions agreement, you will have to have a legal representative of your organization sign, date, and send that back with your formal application. And the deadline to return the application is usually about April 15th, but it will be outlined in your package. The application should not be more than 4 pages in length and using the format set by the foundation. And all of the forms and all of this information is on our website. Once you receive your terms and conditions agreement back in the mail with both your organization and the foundation's organization's signatures on it, you will have 1 year to complete your project. If you cannot complete it within 1 year, you will have to formally submit a approval for extension. Once you've completed your project, you submit your final report and for approval and payment. Now be clear that your grant will not be paid out until you've completed the project, paid for the project, and can submit the bills as part of your final report. Submit the receipts, as part of your final report. Sometimes there's assumptions that you're applying for a grant, and as soon as you fill in the application form, we're sending you a check. That's not how this granting process works. You fund it yourself first, and then once you've proved that you've spent the money on what you said you were going to, then we issue you a check. There is also no final report form. That's another question that we should maybe just make one up just so that I don't get asked it so much. It's on the second page of the terms and conditions, and it outlines what you need to do to submit your final report. What we'll be looking for when the report comes back. There'll be some financials. We're usually asking to show how you thank the Phoenix Foundation, some things like that. So it's not really a form, it's just you do the process yourself with the outline that we give you. So once we receive that, we ask for that electronically and a hard copy. The reason for that, some people think, well, why do you need all those copies? It's strictly because we're a charitable organization and administration costs, we try to keep them low. So if we have to be scanning and photocopying and printing stuff out, it ups our admin costs, and we try to keep those low. So we ask that you submit both those ways, then we can file them electronically and keep the hard copy because we have to have all of that for the CRA. So that in the nutshell is the process behind what happens. And like I said, I'll just send these around. You can take those home so you have a step-by-step. I think we'll take the questions for granting now. And Carolyn, do you want to join me? And we'll take the questions for granting now before Gary does his updates. Sure, we'll take questions. Fire Max.
My question is around, I have 2 questions.
Yep.
The credit union, Community Endowment Fund, and Phoenix are now 2 separate applications, 2 separate funds.
Nope. They have always been, the Grand Forks Credit Union has something called a donor advised fund. So the Grand Forks Credit Union decides every year, number one, if they're going to grant out, and secondly, who they will grant to. That's a donor advised fund. The other funds that we have are community granting, or general. So those are already committed to be granted out in those different sectors. But the Grand Forks Credit Union is a donor advised.
So how do we indicate when we write a letter of intent, is there any need to differentiate between we're asking Phoenix for this and Credit Union for that? No, or just the same letter of intent and you guys figure it out?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The Grand Forks Credit Union will see all the letters of intent, and they have their own criteria.
Yeah.
And you could do some research and find out what they're interested in funding.
Yeah.
and their board will look at all of the letters of intent, and they will indicate to our committee where they want their funds going before we take it to the general. Because if they pick up one big grant, then we spread the money between the others.
All right, okay. And then what about letters of support? At what point would you like to see those? At the letter of intent stage or at the formal application stage?
We don't actually ask for letters of support unless we're looking further for reasoning. So what we're asking for in your letter of intent is where you fit and how this is helping the community, But as far as a letter of support, we really don't ask for those until we're at the stage where already at a committee meeting and we're debating it and we're seeing we're having an issue there somewhere where we're trying to find the relevance in our community or in the communities around us. And so at some points we'll come back to you and say, can you send us some support letters to say how, and who is benefiting from this.
Okay, but you don't ask for anything?
No.
Okay.
And because all of the applications are always considered for their how broad-based they are. If you're putting in an application that's going to affect 10 people in the community, and somebody else is putting in one that's going to affect 1,000 people, obviously the broad-based will get more attention.
I guess I'm still a little unclear then about, back to my first question about the credit union and Phoenix. You said that sometimes the credit union has their own criteria.
No, they always have.
They always have their own.
So how do we indicate to you that what criteria we're addressing?
We really don't have.
They still have to fit within the criteria of the Phoenix Foundation.
Uh-huh.
It may be that the credit union will have a separate grant cycle
Yes.
that is outside of the criteria of the Phoenix Foundation.
Yeah.
So they may be able to support things that the Phoenix Foundation can't under
Right.
law.
Uh-huh.
So that's where that distinction comes in. So while the credit union has its own criteria, that objectives that they're trying to meet, they still have to fall within the general criteria of the Phoenix Foundation and its charitable activities.
Okay.
So, for example, the credit union, I believe, looks to grow small business. That is not in a charitable organization's. That's not something we can have come through the Phoenix Foundation.
Right. And they might be able to help support a festival, whereas we can't.
Yeah.
Or a computer lab, or book publishing, or something. All those do not that the Phoenix Foundation steers away from.
Okay.
The credit union may, in their own separate cycle, do.
Separate cycle. Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
If you go on Facebook, actually, Grand Forks Credit Union is right now advertising for it, and the guy that sits on that committee,
Yeah.
well, we have to have this weird arm, but he's also sits on my board. We have an arm's length relationship when it comes to this grant because it gets awkward. But so they put out on Facebook as well as on their website, what they're doing right now is their community endowment fund.
Yes.
You go on there, you'll get all the criteria on what they're looking at, what their mandates are. They are very much small business and business driven, which is mostly why I'm here, because they're pushing down my throat that I should be applying for it. But so should others, not just me. There's not just one they agree to. But if you go on Facebook or their website, it'll actually show all the criteria that they're asking you to meet. They have an online form that you'll fill out, and it's short and tiny.
But I was under the
20
impression
words.
that's one and the same. That the letter of intent that the credit union has on their website is the same form
Yes.
that we are submitted to Phoenix. So,
They just board with it.
so we would, okay. That's confusing.
Yes.
Well, some people apply directly to Phoenix Foundation, and some people apply directly to the credit union.
And some are going to apply to both.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so that's our situation. We're going to apply to both.
Okay. And therefore, the credit union may, and I'm not saying they
Yeah,
will,
yeah.
but they may say, okay, we're already supporting this here, we're not going to support it here as well.
Okay.
And when I was speaking to Jeff Farrell, who I
Yeah.
believe is your contact,
Yeah.
he indicated to me that all the applications that are received through the credit union using their template,
Yep.
which is a
Yep.
mirror of ours,
Yep.
will be fed to the grants committee.
Okay.
So it's just essentially
Point
two
of entry.
2 points of entry for a single funding stream with respect to the Phoenix Foundation. They will, like you pointed out, will have a separate application process for their out of season, essentially, granting cycle. So,
Yeah, things that don't qualify
yeah.
under the Phoenix Foundation. Yeah. And you know, I do think it's a little bit confusing that's,
Yeah.
And maybe we'll just ask Jeff to tighten up the language a little bit.
yeah, so that people understand that all the charitable stuff will still be coming through the Phoenix Foundation and only the business type stuff.
Would go direct, would go and stay.
Right.
With them.
Stay with them, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll be one letter of intent that
Yes.
has, okay,
Yes.
all right, that's
Yeah.
all.
Because they're going to see the letters of intent.
Okay.
They're going to see all of the letters of intent. And if you fit into their criteria, they may say, we'll take this one.
Okay. Thank you.
So where does the development of social enterprise fit in the scheme of the Phoenix Foundation? Is that because there's the some do not, but it didn't specifically say do not as far as pursuing a social enterprise project vis-a-vis a charitable organization. Is there any restriction around that? Because it's a business proposition, right?
Right.
As long as the funds weren't going to someone's pockets,
Admin.
yeah, I think it would be fine, and I think that would fall under the C. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I guess any clarification then, I had Councillor Christine Thompson was speaking with me about this foundation's grant when we were looking at our budget and looking at some of the initiatives we have for 2018. And her concern when she talked about the Phoenix Foundation and me applying was that we can only apply for capital grants. There was no other opportunities. There's some of the projects that we're looking at have costs such as licensing. So like if I do a movie in the park, I apply for a license for that. If I want to do an event of some sort, there's not that you guys do an event, but do you know what I mean? There's other costs outside of just the capital. And her understanding, at least what she said to me, was that it had to be capital only. And that was confusing to me when I looked at your website and went through the criteria because it doesn't specifically say that, just so long as the grant doesn't go towards admin fees, wages, but there could very well be, at least, am I wrong here? Am I missing something?
Well, what we're looking at here, I think, is consumables. So you're talking, let's say licensing. It's something that has to be repetitively done every year. That's something we're not going to fund because that's the cost of doing that particular thing. Let me put this in a different fashion. Let's say that somebody was granted a computer and a printer. Okay? Well, what we're not willing to fund is the paper, the ink, the electrical, all of the things that go around it. And so that would be along the same lines, is that's consumable.
But what about the software, which wouldn't really be, I mean, it might be consumable and some things need to be upgraded after 4 or 5 years, but say we needed somebody needed a Sage bookkeeping software. It's not technically, I mean, in some ways it's an asset, but it's not a tangible asset, right? It's a piece of software that runs its computer equipment. Would that doesn't
I
come
still
in?
believe that would be the cost of doing business, basically. And so that's where we pull back from.
Okay.
So back to program-related services. That was one of the bullet points. So say, for instance, it's an existing program, but they want to expand the services. Say it was counseling, for instance, specifically geared towards men, for instance, that's not readily available in the community. That would actually, the whole application would be toward wages. So that's that can't happen. It's
That
got to be
can't
a specific project piece. Gotcha.
But with a grant like that, I've found ways around that too. Not that I'm trying to be dirty, but I've done a fair amount of grants. So with gaming grants, for example, you can never apply for a new program. And if it is a program that you've run for a couple of years, it can never go towards wages. There's nothing stating that your internal funds of your own investment can't go now 100% towards your wages, and that entire grant is now applied to the rest of the admin costs,
Right.
or in this case, the rest of the assets that you're purchasing. Well, internally, rather than putting 10,000 to wages and 20,000 out, you're now putting 30,000 only to this and asking them to cover that. So there are ways
Allocation.
of doing that a little bit, but
Yeah, because remember, we'll only fund 30% of your project.
Yeah.
So you just have to look at the 30% that will fit into our criteria.
And we're not willing to lose our CRA status.
Any other questions? Clear as mud?
Excellent.
Well, the good thing about it being as clear as mud is we do have a website that has all of this information, and you can, on the handouts on the bottom is the email for the Phoenix Foundation. You can email us anytime. We don't have an office, so we don't have a standard phone number to send for questions, and sometimes that's sometimes people don't like that, but that's how we operate because we keep our admin fees low so that more money can go into the community. So, okay.
Again,
Well, now that you guys are all up to date on that, we're going to turn you over to the president of the Phoenix Foundation, who is going to update you on some of the things happening, some provincial initiatives, some opportunities maybe to hear from the Vancouver Foundation about funding that could happen locally, and also about some exciting sessions coming up here in the Boundary. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. Hi. So, as she mentioned, Vancouver Foundation, I've been in contact with them for the last few months more intimately on a couple of things. One is a flow-through fund that they had received for $7 million on social innovation and combating poverty. So they've, in the last year, have spent or done some flow-through granting to the tune of $4.3 million, and there is about $2.7 million remaining, which this year will be made available to those communities that didn't have a chance to apply for them or didn't have projects ready in the first round. So that's a pretty exciting thing that's coming in, and I've been working with the president, actually, of the Vancouver Foundation to see if we can get some project that is essentially shelf-ready. One was actually, Beth's was a consideration for that. Of course, BC Housing and some changes there may affect whether or not they apply for it. But it's something to think about. So if there's something in one of your organizations that you may think would be suited to addressing poverty or the gap between the rich and poor, maybe this fund is something that you can tap into. Vancouver Foundation separately also has been granting around the province through field of interests. Last year they funded, they granted out to the tune of $10 million to different community foundations through the various community foundations around the province in support of different programs that the community foundation may not have been able to support themselves. So it's sort of like a bit of the big brother, hanging behind us to say, hey, we can give you a leg up where you might not be able to do it all yourself. So not big brother in a 1984 way, in a good way. Yeah. So those are two things that are coming up. And in fact, what I've been trying to organize is to have a couple representatives from the Vancouver Foundation to come out here for an additional information session, really addressing what they have available. And I'm looking at potentially the 19th or the 22nd of February for that. They will be driving up here, so hopefully just trying to delay their session until the roads are a little bit better and we can accommodate them a little better.
There is grants from Vancouver. Is it something that you can apply for?
Yeah. So, and that information, so their granting session or their granting cycle begins in July. So, that'll be well after we've sort of figured everything out. So if there are still projects that you need more support on or new projects that you didn't get to, there may be the Vancouver Foundation funds that you might be able to apply for. Yeah. So we'll keep everyone updated. Everyone that's here will get an email to the effect that these guys are coming up, and once we've got the firm date. Another thing, over the last couple of years, and I'm not sure. I know Ted and there's probably a couple other people that have been to at least one of the community conversations that the Phoenix Foundation has hosted over the last couple of years. Now, these community conversations, the intent is sort of to explore what the community feels the needs are. So, like the Vital Signs report is a snapshot or a pulse taking at one time in the life of our community. Community conversations are much more dynamic and real-time measures of what's going on and where people might think that the needs are. It's also a chance at consensus, participatory governance. So these are ideas that we can explore and expand on as citizens that see community not as a problem to be solved, but as possibilities to be embraced. So I've been taking a whole bunch of training supported through the Vancouver Foundation and through the Phoenix Foundation on art of hosting, which is this very, very interesting way of holding space with people and learning new ways of governance. So this next session that I look to hold is actually a bit of a two-parter. Well, not a bit of a two-parter, it is a two-parter. What it is going to be exploring what it is to belong. So last year, of course, was the big anniversary of Canada, 150, and Community Foundations of Canada had held as its theme belonging and what it is to belong. So we want to expand on that in this next community conversation to see what we each as individuals believe belonging to mean to us. Because while the word may have a particular meaning to me, it is a fact of human nature that I assume that you mean the same thing by the same word, when in fact that is definitely not the case. So the idea is to explore what we mean when we say we belong or we don't belong, then to identify some activities or projects that may go towards enhancing what it is to belong, and then to actually develop teams in some actionable goals that we can break out into, research, and then come back, report to the larger group, and then set about actually undertaking it. So I'm looking to have this first meeting, and so it's kind of by invitation registration. So if you're interested, I would encourage, and notices will go out, of course, to say that you're interested, and then we'll get you on that list. It will be limited seating, limited capacity. We're looking for probably about 60 people. But the commitment is not just to the first. If you're coming to the first, you're committing to the second, or we would hope so. So the date for the first will be the 1st of March, and then the second date will be the 15th. And it'll be a pretty cool event. We're gonna, our hope is to have it over at the Art Gallery and use a couple of spaces there to have some very interesting conversations. So I'm hoping that you guys will all be interested in coming out. So, any questions for me?
If you have a prior commitment to one of those, but you're interested, can you send someone of your organization in your place?
Yeah, and this isn't necessarily about organizations. So, we're not trying to target the same 20, as it were, right? What we're actually looking to do is by asking 60, is to try and get a really broad spectrum of what the whole demographic is, not just in Grand Forks, but across the region we serve. So if you know someone that you think might be interested in this, by all means, they can just get a hold of us through the Phoenix Foundation website. My number, I've got it all over the place, so by all means, get a hold of me by whatever way you feel most convenient, and we'll see about getting you on.
What will it be called?
Well, right now I'm just calling it community conversation.
Okay.
I flirted with CommuCon because, but I don't know, it's just
That doesn't sound very friendly.
CommuCon, yeah. Anyway, no, I don't know. There'll be posters and some advertising going out to let everyone know that what it is distinctly. So anything else? Okay, well that's it for me. So well, thank you all for coming out. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, before we end tonight, is there any other question on your mind? Nope, you all know exactly how to apply for grants, exactly what we do. Perfect. Our job here is done.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming out on this blustery evening, and we hope to see grant applications from you all.
Thank you.
Safe drive home.